Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you
Hello and welcome to the final episode of Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast. For the past year, we've looked at every GBV LP every 2 weeks and, well, now we're done. My name is Jeff Gomez and I'm kind of exhausted, but before I can rest, we have one more record to look at. Thankfully, it's a damn good one. Today we'll talk about 2018's Space Gun. However, let me say for the last time that all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators, and of course, all opinions, especially the ones you don't agree with, are mine. Once again, let me thank Jeff Warren for creating and maintaining the Guided by Voices database, which you can find at gbvdb.com. It's an absolutely killer resource for any GBV fan, and the next time you're there, go to the page called Support This Site, and please share a little love with him. He's been doing this for a long time, and he does a great job. Now, if you'd like to support me, go to my website, don'tcallhome.com. There's some links to records and books you can buy, not to mention there's a novel that you can download for free or read completely online, so head over to don'tcallhome.com and spend some time there. And of course, go to the podcast site, everygbvlp.com, to listen to all of the past episodes, including the bonus episodes. I'm also getting a mailing list going, so scroll to the very bottom in order to send me your email address if you want to know when I upload another episode next year or just have some other GBV-related news. You can also reach me at jeff@everygbvlp.com, so drop me a line if you want to say hi or tell me yet again just how I got it wrong on the Alien Lanes episode. Seriously though, I'd love to hear from people, so shout out if you have the time. And finally, let me say that the Guided by Voices tribute LP, How Do You Spell GBV, will be released next week. It's going to feature 27 original songs. That's right, 27 songs about or inspired by Bob, the band, and even Dayton. It's a really nice listen, and some truly amazing tracks are on it. It'll be able to stream or to download for free, and I'll put the entire thing together as a final bonus episode, so be sure to check that out. Plus, when it goes live, I'll be premiering a music video for one of the tracks featuring content sent in by GBV fans from all around the world, so be on the lookout for that too. I'll debut at the end of this episode the compilation's last track. It's called Military School Breakfast on Titus by Mushcat. It's a truly gorgeous song, and it seems fitting for that to be the last thing you hear in the series, so stick around until the very end to catch it. Now let's get to the final show. So this is it. 25 studio records, 25 episodes, plus 5 bonus episodes. Let's take a look at what that means by the numbers. Together, we've taken an in-depth look at more than 24 albums, starting with The Devil Between My Toes, released way back in 1987, and finishing up with Space Gun, which we'll talk about today, released 31 years later. We also had song-by-song commentary for 453 tracks, and it only took us a year to get through it all. Phew. But like I said, we're not done. There's one more record to go, and that's Space Gun, the only record the band released in 2018. And thankfully, it's a good one. In fact, I can't be more delighted that this is the final episode of the series, since this is a truly remarkable album, a late period classic that's pretty much unheard of in terms of indie rock. Because if you think about the field of musicians and bands who were around when GBV made its debut, whether or not you start the clock in 1993, which is when they first appeared on most people's radar, with their first widely distributed album, Vampire on Titus, or you go all the way back to 1986, when their first EP was self-released, there's pretty much no other band or artist who's either still around or, if they are, who's still creating high-caliber work at the level that GBV is currently doing. For example, one of the band's earliest and biggest inspirations, R.E.M., broke up in 2011, and even before then, their last couple of records were not up to the standards of their early output. And a bunch of indie rock contemporaries are still around in one fashion or another, whether it's Pavement's Stephen Malkmus or Sebadoh recording a new album. But no one from the 90s is as strong today as they used to be then. Probably the only person from the indie scene who's still around and producing really good work is Jay Mascis. Whether it's with Dinosaur Jr. or his own solo stuff, he's managed to endure through the years and retain his core audience, as well as picking up a few new people along the way without any loss of credibility. So the fact that GBV's still around and are better than ever, for me, Space Gun is their best LP since Isolation Drills, shows that Bob both shows no sign of slowing down and that the quality of his work remains sky high. And that's not to say that Pollard's gone totally legit or stopped indulging his passion for wacky side projects. The Cash Rivers records, of which there have now been 2, are actually a lot of fun. Even though they're not GBE, they're not Hazard hot rods either. They show some very serious musicianship, and quite frankly, they're a lot of fun to listen to. I actually think that Do Not Try to Adjust Your Set is absolutely brilliant. Barring some of the Boston Spaceships stuff, it's my favorite thing he's done outside of GBV. So, as I said in the How Do You Spell Heaven episode, it's a great time to be a fan. In my talk with Travis Harrison, he mentioned how Space Gun and the last couple of records were made, with him and the guys in the band receiving boombox demos burned onto a CD. These demos consisted the entire record, in order, with Pollard bashing out the songs on an acoustic guitar, recording them straight into a vintage boombox. Now, in the Earthquake Glue episode, I played some of the demo versions of songs that later appeared on the record, contrasting Bob's initial versions to what was later released. The stuff that was on the Edison's demos were actually pretty polished, with a few of those versions sounding good enough to be released. They were certainly recorded better than some of the stuff that came out on the reunion LPs. Well, his boombox demos don't sound anything like that. And while I don't have any GBV boombox demos, Pollard did release them for the Boston Spaceships double record, Let It Beard. So just to give you an idea of what the guys and engineer Travis Harrison are receiving from Bob, here's a bit of Bob's boombox demo for Earmarked for Collision.
Baby, you're earmarked for collision. One time that you checked me for collision.
And now here's the finished version.
Baby, you're earmarked for collision. The one time that you checked me, it's collision.
So it's pretty interesting to hear how Pollard's collaborators and the musicians he chooses to work with add their own touches and flesh out the basic demos. In terms of the 15 tracks on Space Gun, 14 were completely original tracks. Only one, That's Good, released on Suitcase 3, was an older track that Bob wanted to rework. And while 2 other Suitcase songs were considered for the LP, they were later dropped in favor of new songs. The songs that were considered were pretty interesting, especially I'd Choose You from Suitcase 2. It's a super old track going all the way back to 1984. The other, Raphael, was from 2000 but appeared on the first Suitcase compilation. The cover for Space Gun, after 2 LPs which had a single photograph, featured a really nice Pollard collage. And the fact that the cover just screams GBV, to me, adds to the idea that this is a truly classic Guided by Voices album. Another thing that's different about Space Gun is that Bob made a point to not release a whole bunch of competing material in 2018. Whereas just a few years prior, you might get 2 Circus Devils LP, a new side project, a Pollard solo album, and then 2 or 3 GBV records. This time around, Pollard wanted to focus not only his and the band's efforts on one project, but he wanted to let the fans be able to focus on one thing as well. As Bob says, we're all very proud of Space Gun, so I decided to not give it any distractions or competition for the entire year of 2018, other than a couple of very minor non-GBV studio releases. I want to let people just chew on that one for a while and see if it has sustaining power. Bassist Mark Shue echoed this in an interview, saying, "We felt like Space Gun could stand alone, and it needed to." This seems to me a very interesting, not to mention somewhat damning, admission in terms of the Bob's too prolific debate. Because Pollard's here basically copping to the fact that when he releases 6 or 7 albums a year, they do in fact compete with each other. It also just plain confuses people, not to mention makes it hard to keep track of so much stuff. When work is of a high quality, people want to live with it, to savor it, and if a work is deep enough, as Space Gun is, then 1 record a year is plenty. So by having there be just 1 GBB record in 2018, it gave everyone, the band, the fans, and the press, a chance to really take it in and enjoy it. Now, in the last episode, I likened How Do You Spell Heaven to Bowie's breakout 3rd record, The Man Who Sold the World. Well, I want to keep that comparison going since Bowie's follow-up LP, Hunky Dory, saw main sideman and guitarist Mick Ronson begin to expand his role in the band. Ronno was no longer just providing heavy metal licks and power chords. He was also providing intricate arrangements and playing mellotron, the same as Doug Gillard does here on many occasions. And Gillard's already talked of doing more of that on future records, and you can see from even How Do You Spell Heaven to Space Gun, not to mention an earlier LP like Isolation Drills, an expansion in the sound and overall musical palette, and I hope that continues in the future. Speaking of David Bowie, another comparison I want to make is Scary Monsters to Isolation Drills. Scary Monsters was a late period Bowie LP which many defined as his last really solid album. It was a heavy rock record and it had some really great tunes. It was also perceived to be the last time until Black Star that he pushed himself in his vision. And so pretty much any halfway decent record that Bowie made after 1980 was described as being his best since Scary Monsters. I now see that happening with GBV except with Isolation Drills. For a lot of people, Isolation Drills serves as a similar sort of signpost, the late career masterpiece which all things get compared to. And so during the second or third or fourth GBV renaissance, however you want to count or term it, you see a whole lot of it's their best record since Isolation Drills. I'm not saying it's wrong, I did it myself just a minute ago, but that thinking does a disservice to the second round of Matador albums, not to mention the reunion LPs, some of which were really strong. One more thing that Bob has in common with Bowie is that the same way Bowie's first child was named Wowie Bowie, Bob's first child was named Wallard Pollard. Sorry, just kidding on that one. 3 singles were issued from Space Gun, the title track, which actually came out in December of 2017, followed by See My Field and That's Good, both of which came out a few weeks before the LP was released in March. The B-sides for these singles continued the tradition of being a place for tracks by the other guys in the band. The See My Field 7-inch had 2 B-sides, one by Kevin March and one by Mark Shue. That's Good featured tracks by Doug Gillard and Bobby Bear Jr., while Space Gun only had one B-side, a song called Kingdom of Cars, which, in a reversal of the I Am a Tree scenario, Bob wrote but which Doug sang. Videos were made for Space Gun and See My Field by filmmaker Hunter Christie. Christie had been in a band in the early aughts with Mark Shue and they'd stayed in touch. Knowing Hunter's interest in film and video, Mark asked Christie in 2016 to make a video for a pair of New Year's Eve shows in Philadelphia and Brooklyn. The short clip that Hunter produced, it's just a minute long, perfectly captures the essence of the GBV aesthetic. The grainy quality of the film matches the band's lo-fi sound, and the use of the Cold War-era NASA footage makes it basically look like a Pollard collage come to life. So you can see how the band dug his stuff and asked him to eventually make videos for the new record. However, Christie was initially tasked to only create one video, and it was actually the second one to appear. As he says, days before I was set to film the narrative sequence of See My Field, the team asked if I could shoot a video for Space Gun really quickly. Christie then filmed, edited, and completed the video in under a week, adding on the coda of the kid in the space outfit ejecting the VHS tape and thus connecting the 2 clips. Both the videos are a lot of fun, with my personal favorite probably being Space Gun, just because I love the way that the graphics, partly inspired by Kubrick's 2001, perfectly match what's happening in the song. Plus, the women dancing looks cool and there's a fun 3D effect with the heads of the guys in the band. It's just a really nice video for a really nice song. Plus, when the rune shows up at the end, it gives me the chills. See My Field is also a really nice clip. It features a boy who's a GBV fan as he rocks out in his room and tries to master Bob's moves, such as the high kick and the microphone twirl. The clip alternates from Bob doing the real thing in concert to the kid trying to replicate Pollard's performance in his room. There's a very nice touch when the video goes from Bob holding a microphone and a beer to the kid holding a toy microphone and a juice box. Reviews for Space Gun were almost uniformly ecstatic, with the majority of them saying that the record was an instant GBV classic, not to mention the best music Bob had put out in a long time. Blog, A Pessimist Is Never Disappointed, wrote that Space Gun is a superb record and one that stands as a clear peak in the output of Robert Pollard and Guided by Voices in the 21st century. Glide magazine gave the record a 9 out of 10, proclaiming Space Gun to be the group's most consistent album to date and calling it a big-time, polished rock record, start to finish. Rolling Stone called the album pretty great, adding that it totally makes sense coming out after 1996's Under the Bushes, Under the Stars. Discussions magazine called the record one of the band's most consistent albums to date, adding that Space Gun is an LP that was created from rock and roll's DNA with influences spanning every decade since the 50s. Website Neon Filler, grading the album a 9 out of 10, called Space Gun the best thing Pollard's recorded under the GBV moniker since he resurrected the band back in 2012. The same review also praises the LP for its uncharacteristically consistent songs, saying, "There's little in the way of filler here and none of the half-formed snippets that can frustrate the casual listener." Magazine The Big Takeover wrote that Space Gun ranks as another worthy installment to the canon, prolonging fans' bafflement over the songwriting fuel still left in Pollard's tank. Musician Kristen Hirsch from Throwing Muses and 50-Foot Wave, in an essay entitled Guided by Voices Are Still the Masters of Creepy Cool, wrote that listening to Space Gun, Guided by Voices' newest album, is like discovering a classic that you somehow missed out on when it first hit. The lone bit of bad news, critically speaking, is that Pitchfork never reviewed the album. Say what you want about the controversial website. I myself have sworn half a dozen times I would never again read it after being pissed off at one of their reviews or articles, but it's a very popular site. It's the Rolling Stone and Spin for a new generation, so it's a drag that Space Gun didn't get reviewed since it's the band's strongest record in years. And a positive review from Pitchfork would have surely led to some new fans or some old fans to check out the album. Anyway, let's now take a trip to the final frontier and look at the LP track by track. The record opens with the title song. Here it comes, Space Gun.
Baddest guy on circus sign, you are the space gun. Doesn't matter what you do, you know what you've done.
This is the record's longest song at 4 minutes and 18 seconds. It kicks off with the sound of an electric paper towel dispenser, which Kevin recorded on his phone at an airport in Phoenix at Bob's request. I actually love that as a touch, and I'm frankly surprised that, for a band who recorded at home for so long, that more found sound or field recordings never made it into their tracks. And a lot of lo-fi songs you hear doors opening and closing, or on a Burning Sofa number 10 track from the 90s, a ringing phone, but those kind of touches actually didn't crop up much in GBV songs, so I love that we get that here. The guitars on Space Gun sound amazing, going right up to the edge of feeding back. There's also some great synth washes or some electronic squiggles. That's a sound that doesn't get used much in GBV, but which here adds a lot. Pollard's voice also sounds great, especially during some call and response lines. Lyrically, there are some great bits, Bob stating in the first verse that, "Doesn't matter what you do, you know what you've done." He's stated in lots of songs, going back to Exit Flagger, that there's no escaping death. Well, here he's saying you also can't escape your conscience. Late in the song, he seems to put in a plug for the more outre examples of his past work, writing, "Experimental exercise, but that's not so wrong." The song takes a bit of a break around the 1 minute and 40-second mark. For their Union LPs, a whole lot of tracks were about that long. But this song makes a great case for pushing past not only the 2 minute mark, but the 4 minute mark, because this is one that just keeps going and going. In fact, I would argue that the last 30 seconds or so, with Pollard repeating all day long, with Doug's riffage in the background, simply makes the song. While it'd be a good track without that last section, with it the track truly becomes a great song. In fact, as an opening track, I'd say it's even the second best opening track ever, behind only Propeller's mighty Over the Neptune Mesh Gear Fox. After calling the track a stunner, Pop Matters wrote of Space Gun, "It's on tunes such as these, where Pollard's reputation is fully justified. The replacements may have burned out, and REM may have faded away, but the torch of loud and tuneful indie burns brightly during Space Gun's best moments." I couldn't agree more. And now let's meet Colonel Paper.
Who is this Colonel Paper of whom you speak? As reed extract from a metal trash can.
This short track, clocking in at exactly 2 minutes, is the perfect companion to the longer opening track. It's a great rock song showing what this lineup in Bob does best. It's heavier than a lot of Beatles tracks, but it still reminds me a lot of their work, both in its sound, it has a bit of a Savoy Truffle vibe, plus the fact that it names and creates a character. That places it alongside Beatles songs such as Mean Mr. Mustard, Dr. Roberts, and Nowhere Man. In terms of what inspired the song, Doug Gillard says, "It's about a close friend and ex-bandmate who bought a bucket of KFC when his wife went away for the weekend, ate 1 or 2 pieces, then threw away most of it in the master trash can in the cold garage and passed out. He woke up hungry in the middle of the night and remembered he threw away the bucket, so he went back out to the garage, rummaged around in the trash can, reaching past the other garbage, paper, and cigarette butts, and proceeded to eat the remaining extra crispy coated cold bird muscle and tendon." You can sort of imagine Bob's eyes twinkling when he heard the story, thinking to himself, hot damn, that's a song. Musically speaking, Doug says that he tried to have a super thin guitar sound and still make the song muscly. He certainly succeeded because it's a really fun track and perfectly placed as the second song on the album. And speaking of characters, meet King Flute.
Do you remember the night on Bill Fate's Squad? Swing of the future
At 1 minute and 22 seconds, this is the record's shortest songs. In terms of the playing and the band, I just have to give a shout out to drummer Kevin March. He's going pretty crazy during the entire length of the track. There are really just too many fills and cymbal crashes to count, and yes, it doesn't at all overpower the track. It sounds really great, and it's a nice showcase for just how good of a drummer he is. And my earlier point about Doug Gillard embracing his inner Mick Ronson, Doug adds some nice instrumental touches to the track, including a mellotron flute. Lyrically speaking, with its tale of squires and kings, this track sits firmly in the category of Pollard's fantasy songs. Next song is Arc Technician.
Leadership in the art of shooting, carefully so, an architect for the hand of vision.
So far we've met Colonel Paper and King Flute. We'll now meet the Arc Technician. This is a nice, slower song that reminds me of the kind of tracks which were on the second run of Matador albums. Many people didn't like those because they prefer the band to just rock out, but I like these quieter tracks that have some acoustic guitar and a bit of a slower tempo. With its line about gathering in pairs, the ark of the title may be in fact the Bible's Noah's Ark. However, late in the song, Bob turns from religion to consumerism, citing meals purchased from Best Bought, a fun twist on the big box chain store Best Buy. Website Echoes and Dust described the song as particularly early REM-like, almost like a lost outtake from Reckoning. Side 1 starts to wind down with See My Field.
Go on, be a spectator, see my field. I discovered lightning in a jar.
For the opening of this song, Bob asked for a sitar, the Indian instrument that came into prominence pretty much thanks to George Harrison. However, rather than try to obtain an actual sitar, Doug Gillard replicated the sound after finding a tutorial on YouTube. To do this, he attached a paper clip to the bridge of his electric guitar and laid it over the strings. Doug called this method subtle but effective. Lyrically, the song's a declaration of intent from Bob, a sort of peek into his personal philosophy. For example, in the opening line, Pollard, in language that goes back to his jock past, taunts the listener, writing, "Go on, be a spectator." Bob, meanwhile, is on the field, a place where he's so comfortable he proclaims, "It's my field." It's mid-game and the old quarterback is telling someone to go along and run so far so they won't be covered and they can receive what Bob's offering. This is what Bob considers real, being on the field and giving your best effort. I've talked before about how Pollard approaches music from the point of view of an athlete. For him, it's physical, primal, spiritual. So it's no wonder then that Bob, a renowned technophobe who still doesn't have a computer or send email, writes that it's no fun being lost in a make-believe city. Why be in virtual reality when you can get on a field and experience real life? The next line's great because of its cultural reference and because it shows Pollard to be self-aware, noting that the Star Wars people just look and laugh. This is a crowd who have only seen what Bob's been talking about in a photograph. He knows he's old-fashioned, maybe even a dinosaur. He knows that people may even laugh at him, but he doesn't care. As he writes in the final line, "I'll keep my field, this is my cartoon." Both the field and the way of life are things he's chosen for himself, and he doesn't care what anyone else thinks. It's a sentiment that's very reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's famous speech from 1910, which he delivered in Paris. It's come to be known as his Man in the Arena speech, and here's its most quoted passage. "It is not the critic who counts. Not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." This idea is not only contained in See My Field, but is the foundation of what I've described as Bob's whole outlook on life and art. Whether you call it being in the arena or on the field, Pollard believes in getting out there and trying. You fail only if you don't engage, if you don't even try to take up the fight. Art's not about inspiration, but instead it has to do with the dust and sweat and blood that Roosevelt describes. Bob lives by this idea every day, waking up and putting himself in the arena. It doesn't always work, and it's not always pretty, but he succeeds by repeatedly taking on the challenge, and we, in our own lives, have a choice. Will we join him on the field, or will we just be spectators? Second to last song on side one is Liar's Box.
Onto a city of paper, burning up gusto, lost, blew it out.
Similar to both the preceding song and the first song on the album, Liar's Box opens with a single-note guitar line. Paula delivers the first verse over this sparse accompaniment until the rest of the band comes in at 30 seconds into the song. Now, while the previous track, Liar's Tale from 1989's Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia, told a story about the dissolution of a relationship, this track is much more abstract. Pollard writes of a city of paper and gusts of lust. I'm not sure lyrically what it all adds up to, even though musically it's a lot of fun. In fact, in the last minute or so, where Pollard repeats summons of a glass to a sad, sad heaven, it's just beyond sublime. I have to go all the way back to the wonderful Words of Smoke section in The Finest Joke is Upon Us from Mag Earwig to find something as comparably sublime.
Summons of a glass to a sad, sad heaven.
Last song on side one is Blink Blank.
Lighthouse black, coffee can blue. I lost an umbrella looking for you in a shitstorm.
This track starts with a chorused bass that sounds an awful lot like something Peter Hook would have played in Joy Division. And remember that one of Bob's favorite bands is Wire, and that the first couple of GBV albums had some tracks that leaned more towards the Berlin era of Bowie than the early rock years I mentioned earlier. So this is right in line with Pollard's love of post-punk. There's also some really nice synth washes on the song, in addition to a solo late in the track that mimics the main melody. The opening lines are totally classic, with Bob writing what seems to be a cheap Moon June rhyme until he delivers a pretty great punchline. Lighthouse black, coffee can blue, I lost an umbrella looking for you in a shitstorm. I just love how he sneaks in that bit about the shitstorm. The next verse seems to be tied about what he talked about in See My Field, Bob saying that he and the band are the champs when it comes to quests for new triumphs. He's out there every day facing down foes and coming up the victor. Meanwhile, all the intellectuals are scratching their heads, mere academics pondering a lost monocle. These are the cold and timid souls Roosevelt described, the critics who don't really count. But all that effort comes at a cost, and sometimes even Pollard's mind gets emptied of ideas, as he admits in the song's chorus, I'm going blink blink in the think tank. First song on side two is Daily Get-Ups.
Here we are in our daily get-ups. I'm having fun on the floor and you're making punch bowls of bourbon fruit.
Even though this is a really brawny group musically and Doug's starting to add more mature musical touches to lots of the songs, this is still GBV we're talking about. And so the record, just like a whole lot of the previous ones, still has a bunch of songs that are well shy of that 2-minute mark. This is one of them. That being said, I wasn't a huge fan of all the songs in the reunion LPs where Bob just started singing without laying down any sort of musical foundation. So even though this is a super short song, it's just 1.5 minutes long, Doug starts the song with a cool riff. Lyrically, it's kind of a throwaway. In fact, the refrain of "Put on your makeup, gotta have it" is so ultra macho it's practically a parody that should sit alongside the Cash Rivers track, You Know She Thinks I'm Sexist. In that song, the aging country star croons, You know she thinks I'm sexist when I get up in the morning and I tell her to make me some eggs. That must have been right after he told her to put on her makeup. Second song on side two is Hudson Rake.
Look, there goes the rat smasher. And behind
This track expands upon songs from the 2 prior albums, whereas August by Cake's Substitute 11 was sort of an outline for a TV show and How to Kill a Man off of How Do You Spell Heaven was structured like a 3-act play. Here, Pollard writes a scene in which he names more than half a dozen characters. The lines that Bob sings are supposed to be coming from these characters or else from news accounts describing the events. For example, "Earthquake shock to the head" is meant to be from an article in the Carpe Diem Gazette, while "There was a terrible accident last night" is being spoken by an anchor from a local TV station. It's a pretty cool idea, and it's amazing to see Pollard, 40 years into writing songs, pushing beyond the boundaries over and over again of what a pop song is or should be. Of course, as a one-act play, it doesn't really work, mainly since the song's under 2 minutes long and Pollard doesn't do much to differentiate his voice from line to line. In this way, maybe he's actually satirizing works like Tommy, where Pete Townsend sang the voice of numerous characters, and yet it all pretty much sounded like Pete Townsend. Kristen Hirsch, in the essay I mentioned before, wrote of the track, "Land on Hudson Rake and stay a long, long time. Play it again and again. This is what happens when you cram a dozen songs into the body of one. It's another planet. The elegant movements are a water slide rather than a narrative, and yet it all makes sense. Nobody else can do this." Third song on side 2 is Sport Component National.
Get ready to run. Get ready, get ready, get ready to run. Get ready, get ready, get ready to run.
For the first half of this almost 3-minute song, the track sounds like a jingle for an imaginary cable channel, SCN, or Sport Component National. Pollard sings of getting ready to run and a night game breaking out. There might even be a bit of Bob's original demo in this track at the 24-second mark. And while that's all fun, the last minute of the song is an absolute blast, with Pollard and the guys creating one of the most anthemic passages in recent history. It turns the song into a real stomper that just begs for you to put your fist in the air. If that section went on for 20 minutes, I still think it'd be too short. There's also some funny sports-related lines. Bob writing of an overly muscled athlete. "He's oh so ripped, you'll recognize the scars." The next song is "I Love Kangaroos."
I am of nothing, a boy with balls, on tiny playgrounds, crow down the round.
This very fun song is basically what you'd expect from Pollard with a title like "I Love Kangaroos." Bob writing, "I love kangaroos. It's funny what they do, and they will jump around and hug you while they're boxing about. They love you too." As Doug Gillard says, apparently it was inspired by a clip Bob saw of a person pushed into water by a kangaroo. But there's a lot more in the song besides just the mad marsupial. Bob, just after mentioning Penguin Books, talks of scratching a rash until it's well read. That's pretty damn clever. I also like that line since I worked at Penguin Books for 5 years when I lived in New York and worked in publishing. Later in the track, Pollard describes it as a travelogue song, which he's happy to compose. That being said, he admits not knowing how to end the song or where to take it next, figuring that nobody really cares much anyways. It's a fun meta touch. The music, meanwhile, perfectly fits the song's subject matter. It's a very fun and jaunty tune. It's probably one of the most effervescent GBB tracks I've ever heard. The song is made even more playful by starting out with the sound of a cat toy, which Gillard says was placed there for no reason, adding, "It makes a chirpy animal sound when touched. My cat ignores it, but at least I put it to use for the album." Moving on, it's Gray Spat Matters.
Sleepy's heavy breath past you, empty your pockets. Step away to your hands up on the wall.
This is a pretty slight song that, at just a minute and a half of chugging guitar, is probably my least favorite track on the album. Plus, this song, combined with Daily Get-Ups, shows that side 1 of this album is much stronger than side 2. The record starts to wind down with That's Good.
What's inside the box, pushing out into the crowd.
This was the third single issued from the album. It was also the only track in the LP to have been based on a pre-existing track, having already been released on Suitcase 3. The song was resurrected because, as Bob says, "I've just always thought that That's Good was very pretty and deserved more attention and better treatment." Part of that better treatment consisted of yet another string arrangement from Doug Gillard. The results are pretty spectacular. It's definitely the best song on the album's second side, and one of the best ballads the band's ever produced. When Pollard writes late in the song, "What's inside a head? Come and take a look around," it's reminiscent of B-1000's Peephole, where Bob says, "I'm looking inside your brain and Christ, it's a cluttered mess." He also writes in this song that you could fall down, but that's good. This goes back to what I talked about during See My Field. Do you want to be in the action, or will you continue to sit on the sidelines, a mere spectator? Because as long as you're in the arena, even if you lose, you win. Blog A Pessimist Is Never Disappointed called That's Good a clear highlight of Space Gun, writing that it marries Pollard's appreciation of classic rock era songwriting with his ability to routinely and consistently conjure a sound that owes as much as, say, mid-period Husker Du as it does to ELO. Second to last song is Flight Advantage. In this song, which was recorded as a band, Pollard mentions a number of natural phenomenon: trees, birds, ants, and dancing spiders. He sings about all of this in sort of a southern accent. It's an okay track, but it's not terribly strong. Again, it highlights for me how the album starts to run out of steam as it winds up. Last song in the LP is Evolution Circus.
Columbus and all of his troops were photographing bulldozers before they flattened back the earth.
This is the record's second longest song at 3 minutes and 37 seconds, making it sort of interesting that the record opens with the longest track and closes with the second longest. It's a super heavy track with lyrics that hint at topics grandly religious and historical, with its talk of Columbus and biblical ghettos. That being said, I can't glean any clear theme or point. But really, who cares? The band sounds great, and there's some nice harmonies toward the end from Bobby Bear Jr., so it's a really nice ending to a truly stellar record. And there it goes, Space Gun. Okay, that's it for, well, the podcast. You'll probably hear from me again sometime next year when GBV puts out Zeppelin Over China, and I guess again the following year when they release any subsequent full-length albums. Otherwise, be on the lookout for the compilation tribute LP next week, and check out my own website, don'tcallhome.com, to hear my own music and download a free novel. And finally, I want to play the last song off of next week's Guided by Voices tribute record, How Do You Spell GBV? When I first heard this, I swear I cried. It was so good. It's not just a super nice song, but it really encapsulates and captures how I, and I think a whole lot of others, feel about Bob and his music. I hope that it has the same effect on you. This is Military School Breakfast on Titus by Mushcat. Enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Military school dance dismissal really hits me in the feels, makes me real, takes me back to a day in my youth when I, a military school cadet myself, was tasked with the planning, smooth execution, and dismissal of a dance. It's remarkable how the lyrics of his songs can mean different things to anyone who hears them. They're just obscure enough. Is that what makes it art? Is that what makes it art? Legendary breakfast code can make me hungry, and when I hear motor away, I want to drive, and singing along drunkenly to hold on hope. I feel lucky and happy just being alive. It's remarkable how the lyrics of his songs can mean different things to anyone who hears hears them. They're just obscure enough.
They're just obscure.
Is that what makes it art?
Is that what
Is that what makes it art? What do you visualize when you hear Kicker of Elves? Do you see Putin or Trump or some ogre? Or do you see yourself? Until I found out that Titus was an avenue in Dayton, I saw it as a mountain with a vampire's castle at the top. It's amazing how the lyrics of his songs can mean different things to anyone who hears them. They're just obscure enough.
They're just
Is that what makes it art?
Is that what
Is that what makes it art?